So I'd like to welcome our wonderful guest today, Jeff Olsen, who has an incredible story. And welcome, Jeff. And I've really heard a story that's touched me so poignantly. Such a beautiful way that you've been able to rise above a situation that would create incredible challenges for so many people. And some people would, through an experience like that, they'd be broken and they wouldn't be able to continue. But you've been able to rise above in grace and with a really strong message for the world that I think needs to be heard. And so I was really drawn to contact you when I saw your amazing documentary made by Anthony Shane. And that was so beautiful. And then I also, after I watched it, I had this incredible dream that after I watched it, that God was actually holding me, and it was such a beautiful, unconditionally loving energy. And I felt that you're a messenger for that, messenger for the light and for the divine. And obviously, I don't think it's an accident that happened after I watched that video. And it was such a beautiful feeling of being embraced. And I woke up and then I thought, oh gosh, I want that back again. It was so amazing. And because Earth doesn't quite cut it when you have something like that happen. So I love you to share your story and tell us all about yourself. And I think people can learn so much from your beliefs, from what you've learned through this experience. And take it away, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor. It's an honor. And I must say, I didn't always get through it gracefully. I mean, it was very difficult. And it's 20 years after the fact. So, there was years I couldn't talk about the accident. I certainly couldn't talk about what had happened to me and what I had experienced. It was very personal. I didn't want people to think I was crazy. And then there was also, it was like sacred. It's like, well, that's my stuff. That's not for anyone else. That's just for me.
Absolutely.
And,
so could you share with us a little about your journey? I know it's such a long story, but to give us the essence of what you went through, and then just for the audience, and then I'm also going to share links below for people to be able to watch the documentary. But just share with us your journey to this point.
Yeah, so I will, and I'll be brief about it so those can watch it. I had a horrific automobile accident. Like I say, it's been over 20 years ago now. The whole family was in the car, and gosh, both of my legs were crushed. The left leg was amputated above the knee. My back was damaged. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs had collapsed. My right arm was almost torn off. And then the seatbelt had cut through my midsection and ruptured all my insides, all my intestines. The most unfortunate thing about the accident is my wife and youngest son were killed instantly in the crash. They were killed on the scene, which was devastating. That's, to go back in that memory, gosh, the car, it was a horrific wreck. They say the car probably rolled no less than 6 to 8 times. I blacked out for most of that. When the car stopped, of course, I was conscious, and I heard my 7-year-old son, Spencer, crying, and I wanted to get to him. But that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned, and I was struggling to stay conscious. And I suppose you could say that I was killed in the accident as well, because here I was in this horrific, horrible moment. Half the family's gone. I've got a hysterical 7-year-old in the backseat of the car, which I can tell he's okay. He's crying in a way that it's like, oh, good, he's okay. But I couldn't get to him. I couldn't move. And I was losing consciousness. And I just, it's the worst hell a man could ever be in. And it was in that moment that light came. That's all I can say is light came. It's like in that darkest moment, there was this comforting light that seemed to surround me. And I rose above the accident. And I thought, gosh, what's going on? Am I okay? Suddenly I could breathe. The pain was gone. It was as if that were a dream, and now I was in reality. And I was really kind of coming to terms with how can this be when Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, she was there in the light with me, and she was fine. She was beautiful. She was okay. And she was emphatic that I go back. Jeff, you've got to go back. You can't be here. You've got to go back. And I knew that was the case. I mean, it felt like there was a choice, but it's like I knew, I mean, it was a difficult choice. Here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, but I knew I had a 7-year-old son in the backseat of that car. And I also knew that Griffin, our youngest son, had passed as well. I was aware of all of that at the scene. But I made a choice, I mean, I had this profound goodbye, and I chose to come back into this realm. And it was as simple as making the choice. I didn't have to figure out how. It's just like, it was intention. It's like, I'm going back. And as all that happened, I found myself wandering around a hospital. And that was an incredible experience because I had no concept of time. From the accident to this light to this profound goodbye. I later found out that people had arrived at the scene. Emergency personnel was called. There was actually a doctor that was one of the people who stopped at the scene of the accident. They rushed me and Spencer to a local hospital. Spencer was not badly hurt. He physically walked away from the accident. He was banged up pretty good. But emotionally, he thought the whole family had passed. The local hospital knew they could do nothing for me with the extent of my injuries, so I was life flighted. I was put into a life flight craft and life flighted to the nearest level 1 trauma center in a metropolitan city. I had no idea. All I knew is I'd crashed the car. I'd said the most profound goodbye I'd ever say. And here I was wandering around this hospital, and I was seeing the doctors and the nurses and the patients and even the families of the patients, and yet I was seeing them in such a profound way. I mean, everyone I saw, it's like I knew them. I knew everything about them. I knew their love, their hate, their joy, their motivations. I knew them as if they were me. In fact, I was experiencing this absolute oneness, this connection with them, as if they were me. I mean, it was like, wow, I see them. I get them. I comprehend everything about their life. And there was this overwhelming essence of love, just pure compassion. It didn't matter what they had done or what they hadn't done. There was this pure love for everyone, until I finally came to a body that I didn't feel anything from, this, man laying on the gurney, which I found odd given the connection I was feeling to everything else. And that's when I stepped forward and realized, oh my gosh, that's me. But it's not me. This is me having this incredible connected experience, but there's my body. That's the skin suit I had to wear. And wow, now I've got to get back in. And that was, that was just the beginning of this whole open door. I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. There was 18 surgeries in total trying to reconstruct and put me back together. And of course I had, a year of rehabilitation after, trying to learn to walk, trying to learn to, adapt with all the injuries. And it was quite a story, but it's like the door never shut. I had profound experiences during those months in the hospital. One at the end of my hospital stay, which might have been the most powerful experience of all. But then there was this continued, communication. It's like my wife, who had passed, continued to communicate to me, not immediately after. There was times I thought, gosh, are they just gone? But then I would have a dream, and then I began to be open to these after-death communications, as they call them, that really led me along a path to not only self-discovery, but discovering the world around me in a much more profound way. And gosh, I eventually fell in love again. I remarried. We adopted 2 other boys. I don't even call them my adopted boys. They're my boys. They just found their way home. so much. I mean, I could ramble on and on, and you know, I mean, it's all in the book. Knowing is my book, and it's the compilation. It's start to finish the entire story with many details. But I would love to, you know, have a dialogue, you know, ask questions, and I can certainly touch on this profound experience at the end of the hospital stay. But yeah, let's just chat for a while, because that'll be far more interesting, I think, for those who are watching.
Well, my first question to you, Jeff, would be, did you have any sort of spiritual connection or spiritual sort of like awareness prior to the accident? Did you feel a connection to the divine, or with that connection with the light when the accident happened, did it all come through at that point? Or did you have anything prior to that?
No, I did. Now, I was different. I mean, I was a red personality. I'd been a Division I athlete. I played American football. You know, I was a he-man, rah-rah, go fight, win.
Yeah.
But there were spiritual things that happened. When I met my wife, Tamara, who passed in the accident, it was an absolute spiritual experience.
Yes.
You know, there was some spiritual things that happened that were profound in the birth of Griffin, our second son, and how he came into the world. He was our miracle baby. We were told we would probably never have any more children after Spencer came. And so I was open to these spiritual things, but it was a thought, it was a theory, it was a
abstract.
You know, it was abstract. It was abstract, and it's only in hindsight that it was powerful. But after the accident, and at the time of the accident, I would say I was religious. I mean, I went to church and I was religious. Now I'm far more spiritual. It's like religion all turned upside down, and yet expanded in these beautiful ways where faith and belief literally transformed into trust.
Yeah.
You know, I'm now far more spiritual than religious. I was religious, and yet I felt, you know, I probably always wanted to please God. I always wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But it was more out of fear. You know, it's almost like beliefs and faith literally transformed into absolute trust, having had these experiences. And I should probably touch on this profound experience at the end of the hospital stay, because that may have been the pinnacle. I mean, if I were to pull big main points, the first point at the point of the accident, and realizing there was something after. I wasn't my body. You know, there was something far greater, and feeling that connection to everyone. I'm thinking, wow, they're far greater than what I see or what I experience. That was the big takeaway. And then this compassion, this love for everyone. At the end of the hospital stay, which the hospital stay was excruciating. I mean, you know, the injuries, they had to leave my abdominal cavity open. I mean, I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move my right arm. They tied my left arm down because I kept grabbing at all the equipment. I was ventilated, you know, a big tube down my throat during the breathing of my lungs. And the infections were horrible because of the rupturing of all my insides. And also, I kept feeling pulmonary embolisms, these blood clots that would lodge in your lungs. So the hospital stay was excruciating. I mean, ICU, and then to surgical recovery, and back to ICU, then surgical recovery, and then, you know, they would do some surgeries to try to save my body. And anyway, the most profound experience was actually at the end of my hospital stay. I was out of ICU. I was out of surgical recovery. And I was in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital. And gosh, I fell asleep one night, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I remember I was finally able to lay on my side. I had laid on my back so long, I had literally rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. It was bald on the back of my head. But on this particular night, I was able to roll over and sleep on my side. I had just gotten to that point. They had stabilized the abdominal injuries, and I fell into this beautiful deep sleep. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm sleeping. I don't know if I had slept for months. I mean, you know, I'd been on heavy narcotics and everything else, but at this point I was off of all that. I was simply taking some Tylenol. I mean, I knew I was getting better and would be going home. But when I fell into this sleep, I felt that light come again. I literally felt that light come and surround me and embrace me. And it was like, wow, I remember this. I remember this feeling, this love, this, you know, elation. And I felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. But this time the light, it dispensed, it went away like a mist or a fog. It went away and I was in the most incredibly beautiful place. And I was so joyful. It's like everything, all the trauma, the grief, the guilt, all that had been left behind. I was just joyful. And I actually began to run. You know, I mean, I mentioned I'd been an athlete, but, you know, I mean, I wasn't going to be running in this realm with the injuries to my back, hips, and legs. But in that realm, I was running. And it was such a physical experience. I was running joyfully and I could feel it all. I mean, in fact, I had the question and I thought, gosh, how do I feel the ground under my feet and the energy charging through my legs and thighs? And how can I be feeling this? You know, and
It would be so liberating when you've been confined to
yeah,
the hospital bed for so long, and then you had that experience. It's like
yeah,
they're giving you a gift, maybe for everything you've had to go through. They're trying to encourage you to keep going from
yeah,
upstairs. And
perhaps because it was this invigorating feeling. And
yeah.
the only thing that I could, I mean, these are words get in the way. There are no words for what I was experiencing, but the only word I can come up with is, it felt like I was home. It's like, I'm home.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like heaven or you know, the other realms. It was like, I'm home. And I was so happy and running. And then I had this knowing that, that I wasn't there to stay, that I would be coming back.
Yeah.
And at that same time, there was this corridor to the left, which I knew intuitively, I'm to go this way. And I went down this corridor. And at the end of the corridor was a crib. And, you know, Griffin, the little boy who passed in the accident, he was still sleeping in a crib. At that time, he was only 14 months old.
Mm.
So I raced to the crib. I peeked in. And there he was. I mean, there was my little boy just sleeping peacefully. And I whisked him up in my arms and I held him. And once again, I was shocked that it felt so physical. I'm like, gosh, I can feel him against me. And I mean, have you ever picked up a sleeping child, you know, and you feel the heat of their body, and I could feel his breath on my neck, and I thought, it's him. He's okay. In fact, I recall I leaned in and I smelled his hair, and I thought, it's him. I'm holding my little boy. And I couldn't believe it. And yet it was so real. It was so real that everything else felt like a crazy dream. And as I held him and I began to weep, thinking, wow, do I really get to say goodbye to him as well? And as I held him, I felt this intense presence coming up behind me, this overwhelming, powerful, cosmic presence. And I began to be fearful. You know, I mentioned I was religious, and I came from a conservative Christian background, and I began to think, oh my gosh, that's God. And I'm holding my little boy here because I lost control of the car and crashed the car. He died because I messed up and lost control of the car, and the guilt, you know, was coming again. And I was feeling this presence coming closer and closer. And I mean, the thought I had was, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. You know, I was fearful. I was afraid of what I called God. Mm-hmm. And as I held my little boy, just so in love with him and thinking he's so precious and so perfect, I felt this presence come up, and this almost felt physical as well. I felt those divine arms wrap around and hold both of us. And it was just like this download, just this downpour of love, peace, truth, acceptance. And in that thought where I was thinking, I hope I can be forgiven. I mean, it just flowed to me. There's nothing to forgive. No. All is well. Mm-hmm. Everything's in divine order. And I was thinking, how can that be? And I began to see my life. I began to see my childhood. I began to see my brothers. I began to see everything. And I saw things that I thought, well, that was a mistake. And yet this divine presence was just communicating, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. To us, you're perfect. And I realized if I'm perfect, everyone is. And I was holding this precious child of mine who was just learning to walk. I mean, he was just taking his first steps and saying his first words. And there was this profound connection where I realized that's how God sees me. In fact, that's how he sees all of us. We're just children learning to walk. And I'm sure they're elated saying, wow, look at our little ones. They're learning to walk here in that realm. And it was just this profound, wow, just raising of consciousness.
Beautiful. Can I share to you when you were describing being held from behind? That's how I felt that night when after I watched your video by God, he was hitting me from behind. Same sort of energy, and this beautiful, overwhelming, unconditional, divine love just enveloping you, which it's really hard to replicate here on the earth plane.
Right. There's nothing like it. It felt physical, but it felt beyond physical. That's what was so crazy. I was thinking, I mean, I don't know what words to use. I've sometimes said it felt so sensual, so sensual. I mean, I could feel, when I held my little boy, I could feel the life in every cell of his being about everything he was. And when I was held, it was like, wow, it's almost as if I was held by God and then I became God. It was like all of a sudden I just had this whole different perspective, and there was this outpouring of what? Just truth and peace and joy and choice. There was always this thing of choice. I mean, as I was watching my life, it's like it was being communicated. You always had a choice. You simply made choices and you experienced the results of what you chose. And we love you, and you chose perfectly for the, progress and the stretching of your soul, even the accident.
So what do you think was the great, if we choose our destiny and we choose our path with free will, what do you think was the greatest purpose for you through that experience in the aftermath of that, to come out into the world and share your message of light? What do you think was the most profound purpose for why your soul went through that experience?
Well, that's a great question, because this is where I said things shifted for me, because I had believed that life was a test, that I was probably failing, that God was going to judge me and I was in trouble. And yet in those arms, I completely realized that life is a gift, that every moment was sacred. And I also had believed that God did this to me. He was going to make my life hard, and this accident happened in some way. And I was always torn about that, because I realized, well, do I blame myself because I lost control of the car, or do I blame God because we all, were so damaged and two of us passed away? I mean, there was this tug of war for those long months in the hospital. But in those arms, what shifted was that literally, yes, there was a plan, that I had created it, and that life was not a test at all. It was a gift, and everything was being played out, and the entire universe supported it for the expansion of my soul. And God didn't do it. I had. In fact, I was in those arms, and there was this overwhelming thing of God, why would you test me in such a way, Mm-hmm. And the answers were just immediately, he's like, no, I wasn't testing you. I know you perfectly already. It's you that didn't know yourself. And all the players, even Tamara and Griffin leaving, were for your soul's expansion. And you're holding your son. They're alive and well. There is no death. They're here. This was all done for your soul's progress and for your experience. And you created it, and we all supported it because we love you unconditionally. It was like, what? How could that be? But it was this total accountability that, wow, you mean I'm accountable for my life?
Yes, there are things.
It was beautiful.
Yes. Yes, that feeling of there are no victims,
Yes.
and also that sense of no separation. There is no separation. Um, it's all one. And my other question to you, because I was talking to a lady, interestingly, who friend of mine, and she went through a near-death experience, and she had the same experience in the hospital where she felt the energy of all the doctors, and she said there were some angry doctors and she could feel their anger and all these sorts of things that you described in your experience. And she said to me, I have a question for Jeff. And I said, I'll make sure I ask it. And
Okay.
she said to me, how, because having been through a similar experience as you have, she said, how do you be able to use that and utilize that in your life on an everyday basis on the earth plane? How can you really make the most of that experience to feel like you can really have a better life? And I guess you've partially answered that, because you said to make the most of each moment in the day, and to just really understand that life is a gift. But there's anything else to do with that you could share with her, because she doesn't feel like she wants to squander that experience and not make the most of it, but she's wondering if she's been able to really be able to use it in her life to enhance her life in the way that she would have liked to.
Yeah, I mean, and it is beautiful, and I still have my bad days. I mean, it's not like I walk about, every day in la la land. I don't, but I have just embraced this thing that everyone's doing the best they can.
Yeah.
And everyone's doing what they believe is right or what they think is the right thing in that moment. But yeah, I mean, something goes on, and if you just realize, what, that's my brother or that's my sister, and they're doing the best they can.
Yes.
And I can give them the benefit of the doubt, and I can be kind. If I don't feel as if they love me, well, then I can still be love. I can love them. I can be that essence of peace and compassion. And yet in some weird magical way, it does tend to come back to you,
I feel that in your energy, in your presence, there's a real grace that's been accumulated from that experience. And even when you tell the story of your oldest son, who, when he was older, he said that at one stage he didn't want to hear about your spiritual sort of teachings because he hadn't had those same experiences himself. And you got the message through really clearly not to judge him. And I think that's such an important message, because we all tend to judge ourselves and we tend to judge others, and to be able to rise above that judgment, I think, is one of the keys, and to be able to be in forgiveness and unconditional love, to walk the path gently through earth with love and forgiveness. I think that's such an important message that you give.
It is. And I mean, this has been the key. If I was to distill that down, letting go of judgments and comparisons has brought me so much peace. I mean, it's like there's really only fear and love. This is kind of a cosmic principle that we all embrace. And judgments come from fear, and comparisons come from fear. And basically all my unease is from fear. But when I can step into love, which means letting go of all that and simply loving everyone. However, that's impossible unless I love myself. That was the 10-year struggle for me is, gosh, I loved everybody, but did I love myself? And it wasn't until I realized I must love myself to be whole. I must love myself to be at peace. And the love has to come from within. I'll never experience enough of it externally. It has to come from within me, and then I can walk in peace.
Can you give listeners maybe a technique or something that you do to feel that love of self? Like, do you have a visualization or something, or is it just a feeling that you feel?
No, I do a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of self-talk. I have some, mantras and affirmations that I use.
And you've done
I do. Yes, I have. And so many beautiful, I mean, after the experience, gosh, I looked into all kinds of religious beliefs. I mean, Buddhism and Judaism and Islam, and I mean, all of it, Hinduism and Christianity in a much deeper dive. And I mean, I still love the figure Jesus. I still call him my master. And yet I saw this whole new realm in what he had taught. I mean, when he was saying, love your neighbor as yourself, I had forgotten about that self part, you know, and it's like, well, how can I give what I don't have? If I have no self-love, no wonder I'm angry at the neighbor, right? Because
you can only love someone else as much as you love yourself. You
right, yeah,
can't give more
yeah.
love
I
than
mean,
what you have within yourself.
you can only give what you have, and so there was that path. And then yes, energy work. I became a Reiki master
Me
healer.
too.
I studied reconnected healing. I studied matrix energetics. I did, gosh, it was a beautiful thing, but I came into the presence of shamans and medicine people and indigenous people. And it's funny because they recognized it. I mean, one of the shaman came up and said, and this was before I ever told my story or talked about what had happened to me. She said, "You've been there." And I said, "Where?" "I've been with you in this little workshop thing, you know." And she's like, no. You've been to the world of spirits and come back. And like I say, I hadn't told anybody or written a book about it. I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "I see it." And you know, she began to recount to me many of the things I experienced. You experienced this and this and this, and I just was blown away. But yes, I worked with her for a 7-month period, 7 moons, you know, and received shamanic rites. So there's all kinds of different practices and beliefs and modalities. But the bottom line is it's love, and it's unconditional love, and it's unconditional self-love. And it's living in such a way where you can really just be, you know. I mean, this was another thing. I used to read the Bible, and Jesus would say, "Be ye therefore perfect, you know, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And I was like, how am I ever going to accomplish that? But I was misinterpreting it. He never said become. He said, be perfect. Embrace the perfection that you are. Consider the lilies of the field, you know, how they grow. They don't spin and toil. I mean, all of a sudden there was this whole new take on what I thought, and my beliefs, like I say, transformed into this absolute trust, which was based in love in such a way that, yeah, you know, you might have people that make you a little upset, but you can say, you know what? I love you, and you're doing the best you can do, and so am I. Let's just hold hands and walk through this journey together and support each other rather than put each other down and judge each other, right?
Absolutely. There's that wonderful Hawaiian technique, the Ho'oponopono forgiveness technique. That's wonderful for people if they're wanting to work with forgiveness. I find that's a really good one to share with others. But I wanted to ask you another question too, Jeff. When you did your wonderful video when you went out on the streets in Utah, and you were in the guise of a homeless person, and you did your sign saying, free, just a sign saying you'd love to have a hug. How was the response to that? Did you get many hugs?
You know, I didn't at first. It was really interesting. What had actually happened, the backstory, my prosthetic limb had broken. And so I was going about on crutches, and it was the holiday season, because when my prosthetic limb breaks, I have to go to the shop and they have to order the parts. And so I was on crutches for a few days, and I had a dear friend, and I just said to him, I have this idea. I mean, look at me. I look like I'm homeless on these crutches. I should go down and, you know, and panhandle. I was not making light of that, but I said I'm having a whole new, you know, experience going about Christmas shopping on crutches. So he said, let's do it. He had film equipment. So he said, why don't you go down and we'll do this social experiment. So we did. We made the sign that said, I just want a hug. And I went down, and I was on the crutches, you know, with one leg, and I looked a bit tattered. And for many, gosh, you know, probably an hour, people just walked by. I mean, they wouldn't look at me. They wouldn't acknowledge me. And this was the key. Finally, and it was a young girl. I still remember her in a bright red coat, and she had her Starbucks, you know, and she saw me, and she looked at the sign, and she stopped, and she just ran over and threw her arms around me and gave me a hug without any reservations.
Beautiful.
And it was a beautiful thing. And you know, I thought, gosh, are people going to think I'm creepy asking for a hug? Or are they going to think I'm a pervert of some kind? But she had no reservations. She ran, she gave me the sweetest hug, and she motioned her friend over, and her friend came and gave me a hug. And it was when one broke the ice, when she did that and others saw it, suddenly people just started coming and hugging me, and they all wanted to give me money. And I'm like, no, 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 I don't want the money. I just want a hug.
Yeah.
But it was fun when I had some shopping money in my pocket, you know, some cash. And so when people would give me a hug, I would give them some money instead of asking them for money. And it was beautiful. But I'll tell you that the key was being acknowledged. I mean, just having people look at you and
Yeah.
say, I see you. You're a human being. You matter. Let me come give you a hug. That's easy, you know, and that was a big deal. Yeah.
I saw a post on Facebook, and it was saying to make sure that you look homeless people in the eye and smile and acknowledge, rather than even just walk past, is so important. And it's interesting that for that first hour, nothing happened, and that was just that energy of her doing that allowed the door to open. Isn't it interesting how energy works? Because I work with energy as well, and I'm always fascinated by that.
It is. And I also was very intrigued with what one person can do.
Yes.
You know, but by her shifting the energy, it changed everyone around her, you know, and it's like, wow. I mean, my takeaway was, maybe even if individually we can each do our bit for kindness or for raising the consciousness, look at the ripple effect that goes out, and look at how that affects everyone around us. And I tell people all the time, you do one kind thing and it ripples into your household and into your neighborhood and into the community and into the hemisphere, and suddenly the whole world is better and changed because you made that choice. You made that one choice.
That's so true. Even doing one consciously kind thing a day, and keeping that momentum going is such a beautiful thing. So in terms of your life now, do you feel that you're still continuing to really evolve in wisdom and spiritual connection? Is that something that grows as you mature? How's that feeling to you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it'd be so boring if we were, you know, if we still weren't learning and progressing and having discoveries. And
do you think soul growth is the purpose of being here? Soul evolution, is that the major thing? Like,
I think so, but I think the bottom line is just loving each other, really. I mean, it's like, yes, it's all about soul evolution, but I think we're evolving into unconditional love and self-love, and that's what changes everything. And, you know, if we could do that, like if we all leaned in and said, let's just change things, let's love each other, let's stop going to war, let's stop bickering, let's stop judging, heaven would be right here. There'd be nowhere to go. I mean, all that peace and joy and beauty and love would be right here. In fact, I think that's what we're doing. We may not be conscious of doing it, but I think that's what we're doing, is creating heaven here as we shift our own consciousness. And there'll be a day where, the entire universe will just applaud and say, oh, we knew you'd do it. We knew you'd finally figure it out.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Oh, it's been such a gift to talk with you, Jeff. Thank you so much for taking the time. Is there anything that you'd like to share with people before we go, in terms of your own learnings?
Oh, gosh. Everything's a choice. Choose joy. Choose to be joyful. Choose to be loving. Choose to be peaceful.
Yes.
And reach out. I mean, there's a lot of people I know that are grieving or hurting. It's a process. You know, I don't want anyone to think I had an accident and had some spiritual experiences and got over it. You never get over it. You might get used to it, but it's a process. You can find me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. It's Jeffery, my full name, Jeffery, middle initial C, then Olsen is Olsen. You can find my book on Amazon. The title is Knowing by Jeffery Olsen. And gosh, I'm here.
Wasn't it? It was #1 on the book.
It did very well in the category. Yes, it hit #1 in the category as the new release and remained there. And I've just been thrilled. I never had any intention of writing a book. I was approached by a publisher to do so, and I thought my mom would buy a copy. You know, I had no idea that people would resonate and enjoy the book. But
you're a wonderful communicator, so I'm not surprised.
Well, thank you. You're very kind, very kind.
Pleasure.
But it's been an honor to be with you. Yes, it's been such a joy to chat.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I just think you've got so much that your presence and your energy and your communications, your messages can teach others. And so it's been such an honor to be able to speak with you. Thank you so much.
The honor's all mine. You're lovely. Thank you so much. And I hope we talk again soon.
Oh, that would be lovely. Okay, have a beautiful day. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, we'll see you. Bye-bye.